We are now going to move to our next session, which is Emma Burton, who's an auditory verbal therapist at Auditory Verbal UK, is going to talk to us about how working completely remotely can be managed, and how do you keep motivation, communications and connectivity going without being physically near. We've heard before the issues with not having your coffee machine moment, and sometimes conference calling isn't quite enough. So she's going to give us some of her views on how to ensure that your workforce continue to feel energized, inspired and supported while not actually being physically in the office. She will speak for a while as the other speakers do, and then we have a Q&A. So please do come in with questions as you did before, because that's what we'll be talking about after her presentation. So over to Emma.
Hello, thank you so much for joining me here today. I would love to know where you're all signing in from. So if you could pop your name and your location into the chat box, that would be great. It is my absolute pleasure to have been invited here to discuss motivation and inspiration with you. And I'm in no way an expert on this topic, but I would love to share some experiences, reflections, and practical strategies from our team that we feel really enabled us to stay motivated and show up at our best each day. And I'm really curious about your experiences and whether any of this resonates with you. So if you have any comments or questions along the way, please do share in chat, and I look forward to discussing them with you at the end of this session. And this session isn't specifically about the pandemic, but I feel we must first acknowledge that most of us are in unusual working patterns at the moment. Even for those of us familiar with working from home, the boundaries have shifted as we are sharing spaces at home and juggling working and homeschooling and all sorts of other issues that possibly didn't present themselves when we were working this way just a few days ago. So what can we do to stay energized, inspired, and supported at work? Just to give you a little context, I work for a small charity called Auditory Verbal UK, as you can see from our header, and we provide a specialist type of therapy for families of babies and young children with hearing loss. With less than 30 total staff members, we're a small team, but with big dreams, and that's to ensure that all children with hearing loss have the opportunity to listen and speak alongside their hearing peers. And our team has always been split across two bases in the United Kingdom. So as you can see on the left, one centre is in a village called Bicester, not too far from Oxfordshire. And the other, as you can see on the right, is in the capital city of London, and that's in Bermondsey. Up until COVID, we saw families in both centres, and we delivered training for professionals also in both centres, as well as online via training platforms. And in fact, our colleague and training lead is living and working from South Africa. So remote working has been an essential part of supporting our whole team to stay connected, even though we're physically distant across the United Kingdom and further beyond. And it was this initial infrastructure, this digital infrastructure, that enabled us to pivot so quickly in response to the COVID crisis. And I'm interested in your profession. Are you working in a small or a large team? And do you find that this impacts on your levels of motivation and inspiration? Perhaps this is something for the Q&A at the end. But in the meantime, I wonder whether you could drop one thing that you're hoping to take away from today's session into the chat. And if it's not covered in the presentation, then we can follow it up afterwards. So let's dive in. One of the ways that we stay motivated as an organisation is by getting really clear on our strengths and our values. And that's through feedback from our stakeholders and brainstorming sessions with the staff. Tapping into our personal why, our purpose, helps us to stay on track despite changes in perhaps how we're operating. And this has been a game changer for me personally. As someone with a core value of learning and growth, when I'm feeling overwhelmed by a challenge, I can tap into that value and reframe it as reframe it from something like I'm having to get this done into an opportunity to develop new skills. And that for me is so much more energizing. And you might think about your values, about what you choose to stand for in the world going forward from here, and your strengths, qualities that come easy to you, and how they show up for you at work. If you're not sure what these might be, then you can complete an online survey for free at www.viacharacter.org, and that might give you a little bit of inspiration. As I mentioned earlier, we built on our digital experience. Although we had some, it was a really big shift to do everything that way. And it really required us to look over our procedures and innovate so that we could continue to support both the families who are also going through so much change and uncertainty, and also the professionals who work with them. I think one of the key enablers of innovation and adapting to change has been having the trust and the scope to try things, and knowing that it was okay if it didn't work out as we planned or as we hoped. Brene Brown is a name that regularly crops up in our team meetings, and having the courage to be vulnerable has transformed the way that we support each other and the way that we show up as a team. I'd like to unpack that a little bit more by talking about 5 areas that I have grouped into communication, clear vision, learning and development, flexibility, and mental health. They tend to overlap, so in no particular order, let's start with communication. Communication has been key, keeping us connected to the company and to each other. But what is the right balance? Too many meetings and people are exhausted, too few and we can float adrift. And how on earth do you find a time in the day where everyone in your organization is free to meet? Those were definitely challenges that we ran into and thought through together. And so for us, we have a weekly note to keep everybody informed about key projects and how they're progressing across the whole charity. So that's clinical, fundraising, communications, operations, etc. And everybody shares an event or a key piece of news from the week, and it is gathered together and circulated as a document on Friday afternoon. And it's really wonderful to be able to read everybody else's achievements and recognise everyone's contribution to the same goal we're all working towards, and also to keep an eye on the bigger picture outside of our individual niche areas. So, similar to working face-to-face, within teams there are also regular scheduled focus weekly check-ins, and we've carried these over virtually. So communications and fundraising meet every Tuesday for coffee and a catch-up, and this has just been so important. I'm sure that many of you are in similar circumstances, but during this remote working period, we've actually had staff members join our team. And so they're working as part of the organisation, but have never actually met all of those team members face to face. And it's really important that everybody feels supported and included and connected, even if it is through something silly like planning and eating the same biscuits, even though we're all in separate locations. A new development has been Breakfast Club, and this is a scheduled, it's a pre-scheduled regular Zoom meeting spot from 8:30 till 9:30 every weekday morning. And it's really an open space where you can drop in and check in with other members of the team that will have also dropped in. And you check in with a cup of tea or coffee and sometimes even a slice of toast. And there's no obligation to turn up, but it's there if you need it. So it's a way that you can catch each other a little bit more informally to follow up on projects. And often this is where one idea sparks another idea. And I'd say it's where most of our innovation occurs. It's why I chose this little infographic that you can see on the slide, because to me it represents those little moments where somebody shares a story and somebody says, "Oh, what if?" And ta-da, we've got a new project that we're really excited about. And I'll touch on those a little bit on the next slide. But first, lunchtime is really a similar concept. It's a regular pre-scheduled Zoom slot, but this one is from 1 o'clock till 2 o'clock each afternoon. And the aim is to really recreate that more personal conversation. So things like what you saw on Netflix last night, or funny things that your children or pets have done, or things like lockdown birthdays that may have happened. So it's really just making space for humour and relaxation and connection, which has been vital really in keeping us all together and keeping that morale high. So building on those ta-da projects, in his book Drive, Daniel Pink distills motivation into 3 components, and that's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Luckily for us, our CEO gave us the autonomy to pursue the creative projects that we all cooked up together in Breakfast Club by embracing and building on those ideas and placing trust in us that we would do what needed to be done with who we needed to do it with in the time that we needed to get it done by. And the more that we stepped out of our comfort zone, the more we learnt, and we shared our excitement over mastering these new skills. And the more that we use these skills to support families, children, and professionals, the more energy that we were really able to pull from building into this shared bigger future. So clinically, the therapy we deliver is all about equipping caregivers with the skills and the strategies to support listening and spoken language development. And the nature of this coaching model means that the therapist does not need to be physically present for this to occur. And many families who live further afield have chosen to receive services virtually before the lockdown period. Similarly, our training courses for professionals equip them with the skills that they need to support listening and spoken language development for the families that they serve. So our mission has stayed the same, but the way that we deliver it has evolved. And we asked ourselves, working remotely, what opportunities do we have to better support families? And so often in these breakfast clubs, we started thinking about what we could do and started offering fortnightly evening sessions. This would be at 8 o'clock at night when children had gone to bed and parents could sit and reflect, possibly with a glass of wine. And we called these our parent Q&A sessions. And it was really a place where we might have a set theme, but parents could really come and ask questions, have questions answered, listen to each other's stories, share stories, and really connect. We also had a meet a therapist session, and that was really for possibly new families who were thinking about where to access support and not really sure what the right choice would be for them. And we thought to ourselves, okay, working remotely, what opportunities do we have to best support children, to ensure that children with hearing loss have the same opportunities as their hearing peers? And really that's thinking about how, you know, we can continue these regular sessions in the family's home and reflect together on the way that we can be the most effective that we possibly can be in service of these families and their children. And we asked ourselves, working remotely, what opportunities do we have to better support the professionals? And so we created free telepractice workshops for us to share experiences, to share tips, to brainstorm questions and reflections. And we also hosted a free international clinical excellence network where professionals in the field from all over the world could log in and really participate in this shared learning experience. So it's the same mission, but a slightly different delivery, and this innovation really just ignited these sparks, this passion in all of us to be the best that we can be in what it is that we're aiming for, and really thinking creatively about how we might get there. And that really ties into learning and development. It's hard to feel motivated and inspired if you can't see a clear path forward. So learning through debrief. Collective spaces like the Breakfast Club really provide us with those conditions to deepen our learning by experimenting and then coming together to reflect and design a new experiment. So what went well and how can we build on that? What went wrong and what can we learn from that? And admitting that sometimes that we just don't know in a safe space with others that don't judge you, creating that psychological safety really just opens up possibilities of what those next steps might be. So through that debrief, we really pool our collective experience, and talking to others gets those creative juices flowing. However, we recognize that sometimes you really just need to upskill in some particular areas, and that's where training opportunities come into play. Again, we've been quite fortunate in terms of whenever there's been a need that's been identified, that we can take that to the team and then think about how to fill that need, either through e-learning mental health training courses, e-learning a specific skill area, around telepractice or particular family service and family support. We've had external speakers come in to provide guided learning and training for the team in key areas, and it's really thinking about clearing that path so you get to see further through this shared knowledge and experience. And I think having that creative learning space keeps that inspiration, that motivation alive, at least for me. But within the team, it's definitely an energy that we felt from those opportunities. And that leads me on to flexibility. So flexibility in terms of work, flexibility goes both ways. The team are flexible for the organisation, and the organisation are flexible for the team. And this takes a lot of trust. A flexible workforce can result in better job satisfaction and high morale. It can be really motivating to know that you can take an hour out in the day to avoid the supermarket queues and then just work an hour later. And that really feeds into Daniel Pink's idea of autonomy. Some people's circumstances might vary. It might be childcare or by ongoing events in our current climate. And that's really going to impact on motivation and inspiration. And ideally, that would be handled very sensitively. And the workplace. A huge demotivator is not having access to the correct tools to do the job. For example, faulty technology that doesn't connect, that just consumes time and energy and adds stress to your day. It's really essential that organisations are able to provide appropriate IT support and guidelines to set up remote working, to ensure that employees really have access to what they need to fulfill their role and to be fully productive. For example, a working laptop, a webcam, a headset, stable internet, work phone, access to files, whatever it is that your organisation needs, that needs to be provided. And then we're thinking about mental health. So feeling motivated and inspired is amazing, but we are not feeling this way and excelling this way all of the time. It's really easy to work long hours and take short breaks when you're working from home. And I have to admit that this one is a big one for me, that I really need to be quite vigilant in monitoring. Again, through support with my team, I've noticed that this is something that's happening for me, and using this connection to check in and share that experience and think about strategies that have worked for them, to try them out, to see if they work for me. I found a walk around the block before I start work and then a walk around the block when I finish work can bookend that day and give me a sense of boundary. And ensuring that I take 30 minutes to step away from my desk and have lunch somewhere different. And possibly booking in something to do at the end of your day when you've planned to finish working, just to keep you accountable to separating that work and life balance. We know that working from home can be isolating, and we need to take personal responsibility to keep in touch with friends and family and set aside time for self-care, but also encourage our colleagues to do the same. And we know that Zoom can be draining. There's lots of evidence coming out at the moment about the extra effort that all of us are exerting in order to understand one another in the absence of all these typical cues that we would be picking up from people's body language. Some people dislike seeing themselves on camera, which adds an extra element of stress that they're dealing with. And some people are constantly monitoring their camera to check in about how they might be coming across or appearing to others. And have you ever been in a meeting where you're waiting for everybody to join before you can start, and you sit there in silence, where if you were in a face-to-face meeting, you might just share a smile with somebody next to you or a few words, but it's this uncertainty of, you know, these new social rules that we're really processing on top of our everyday lives and our work lives. And so instead, where possible, you might think about connecting over the phone or having shorter and more frequent check-ins rather than a longer meeting. There are a number of resources available, some of which I've linked to here on the slide. So from Mind, from the Mental Health First Aid, from the NHS, they're really designed to promote mental health and really worth investigation. And if you have any others that you've come across or aware of, maybe drop them in the chat so that everybody can share these resources together. So, how can we stay energized, supported, and inspired whilst working remotely? I'd suggest by creating a culture built on respect and collaboration, where people can be themselves, their whole selves, at work. By innovating ways to keep communication flowing between and across diverse groups within teams, and being aware of our values and our strengths and exploring how we might bring these into our work life. By seeking opportunities for growth and by being brave and embracing vulnerability as we take these risks and then share that learning with others, whether it went the way we hoped or whether it did not. And through flexibility, by understanding our similarities and our differences and adapting to each other's needs. And through connection to ourselves and to each other, and knowing that you can reach out and access resources for support. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions. So please feel free to contact me and keep this conversation going through any of those channels that you see via email, phone, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And I hope to continue speaking with you.
Hi, Emma. That was wonderful.
Hi, hello everybody. Thank you so much.
That was great, and it was amazing to see you both talking on the screen and then answering the Q&A at the same time. Which, no, but that was super helpful and also delivered in such an inspiring and calm way. I feel very relaxed now. We've had a few great questions coming in. I think your presentation has really inspired a lot of our attendees. The first one, the answer is yes. Yes, the slides will be available for download, so they will be shared, and the actual recording of the session will also be shared. So you will have all of that. I think there is a really great question from Hendy Irawan about how to find that balance between giving employees flexibility and then making sure they work. And it's a challenge that isn't new to the situation. It was always this question about, people working from home and, managers feeling quite anxious about it, especially maybe people who are used to having to be present in the office to do your job. And now that everybody's working from home, it's sort of, it creates that sort of sense of potentially stress about whether people are actually doing their job, they're doing the right job, they're contributing to the KPIs, etc. I mean, what's your point of view on that?
Yeah, I saw that come in. That's such a great question, and I think it is a tricky one, and I think it's tricky because there's so many factors to balance in ensuring that it's a successful outcome that meets the needs of everybody, I suppose, in the hierarchy, everybody in the organization coming together. I suppose when I heard it, what I was thinking of, as I tend to, is that balance between allowing flexibility of the staff and also ensuring that those results are met. takes a lot of trust and a lot of vulnerability. So I always think of Brene Brown, who, if somehow you have avoided hearing about her, is just really worth checking out, because I think when you're able to maybe have these conversations about, you know, these are the expectations that are coming, and being really open and allowing people to share perhaps their vulnerabilities also about what might be going on for them at home. So it could be that there's this perception that people might slack. I think most people want to, you know, have got certain goals, and it's thinking about how to align them together. But I would say that there isn't a clear answer, but from my perspective in the organization, I think the greatest enabler of innovation and achievement has been trust coming from the top. So that's our CEO really driving this, daring to lead, giving us the space and the autonomy to follow projects and to create spaces for us to come and communicate if we get stuck. Thank you for sharing that, Claire. That's such a great link.
I thought, just in case. I think those are really great. And I think this point about trust is a tricky one, isn't it? Because it's letting go of the idea that you need to watch people work to make sure that they work. And I think we've all seen in all of our organizations, team really rallying and working harder than ever before in some cases. I mean, we've heard from the teams at the Scouts organization, it sounds like they've been pretty full on. Yeah. And I think that will encourage managers and supervisors to trust their teams, because they are in fact in there and working very long hours, and flexibility is helping this, not preventing it. I have a couple of other questions. One of them about people who aren't part of an organization specifically, and that's from Nick Bush. He's a consultant. He's trying to attend a number of these forums, but obviously it's harder to create that sense of team and shared purpose and breakfast clubs and everything if you're an independent contractor who may not be part of a specific team. And it's always a little bit lonely to be independent, but it's harder when you're stuck at home and not able to go out and meet people in real life. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of groups, aren't there? There are a lot of avenues to stay connected, possibly more so than I think I've ever experienced face to face, in terms of invitations to learn something, to connect, to discuss. And I'm trying to think, so not being an expert on motivation or inspiration in terms of a team, I suppose I'm thinking, you know, some of the things that have worked are having an open space where people can drop in, and then smaller specific groups for teams to meet, because getting a whole group of people to find a time when, you know, they don't have other work commitments or home commitments can be really tricky. So I would say that having a little bit of combination approach has worked the best in our organization. Obviously, Nick, I'm not sure about the specifics of how that works for you as a freelance consultant, but I think maybe having a couple of drop-ins allows people to fit with their schedule, and then check in with you if you've got something very important to be sharing and ensuring that everybody's connecting with.
Yes, and I think that's great. I would say also from my experience, having a clear outcome is helpful, because when people are very busy, it's harder to commit to events if there isn't a clear, I wouldn't say payout because that's a bit too commercial, but something that they're going to either contribute to that's actually got value to them, or something that they're going to get out of it. And that's sometimes harder in networking events, although the networking events coming after this event will absolutely do that, so please join, because they're going to be amazing. That was a nice plug. Anyway, one of the things, sorry,
Claire, I've just seen that Nick's clarified, and he's saying he's wondering if there are people in the organisation who don't show up because they're less comfortable with this kind of thing.
That's interesting.
Are you thinking about less comfortable with being visible on Zoom? Sorry, Nick. I'm not sure if you're thinking about less comfortable in terms of being visible and joining the meetings, but I suppose
maybe those sort of more free-flowing networking events that are harder to connect to if you're not used to this sort of informal virtual event, maybe.
Okay, so yes, and new tech generally. So so I would say there are definitely people in our team that are less confident with the technology, and who also have experienced a lot of technology issues in terms of profiles and accessing. And I think that was I was touching on, in terms of to ensure the flexibility, there has to be the IT support. So definitely there have been people who haven't been able to show up to certain meetings because they can't connect, or something's broken, or actually it's really tricky for them maybe to download certain bits and pieces. I think for us, I suppose that goes into the communication piece, in terms of sometimes you might check in with a phone call or a phone conference, or Mike's saying he has somebody who puts a teddy in front of the camera. So yeah, so sometimes there's little workarounds, and I think that really comes into that connectedness and team piece, that there are people who are more confident in terms of using the technology and using it in very innovative ways, people who are less confident. But I think the more we can check in with each other and be flexible ourselves in how to support that engagement, then that seems to have worked for us.
I also know the Charity Digital team went through a Zoom background competition, because there was also people who don't want to show their house, which is completely fair. And so there was a lot of creativity there that I have seen. So that's great. Kerry is asking a great question about the space to brainstorm. You've got your breakfast club, but how do you ensure, how do you motivate people to contribute? How do you encourage contributions without making it an obligation, which we all know doesn't really work for brainstorms?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're put on the pressure to be creative, that's when it disappears. Hey, when you think that you're on the spot, and immediately all that space, I think, shuts down. So in terms of brainstorming, I suppose a lot of the brainstorming might happen offline, if you like. So we would have certain projects that we're aware of. We would check in with each other at those group meetings, or again, if people aren't happy to join the virtual meetings, the weekly note is something where you would type in something that you're working towards, a project that you're focused on, somewhere where you've had a result or a positive experience. So people are quite motivated to either record or share what they've done, and then it also gives people a chance to see what other people have done. And I know that somebody raised something else about how you can motivate people to join in on, I think it was Bruno who said, how can you increase people's motivation and engagement on projects that might not be their first priority?
Yeah. How do you mimic the just dropping by your desk to ask a question? That's the sort of, very informal, it's not your project, but I have this specific question. How do you recreate that, I guess?
Yeah, I think sometimes having something where there's less pressure, where you can read the impact that it's having, even though you might have tasks that are your priority and you're being asked to do something else that maybe doesn't fit in with your priorities. I think if you can see how it contributes to the wider organization, I think for me that then gives me my reason why, even if perhaps I've got certain other deadlines, but I can see the value that this needs to be done. It really improves my engagement, my ability to show up and say, okay, let's do this. What does it take?
I think also Nick's point about, I don't know if you do this at all, Emma, but this Nick's point about sometimes just picking up the phone, and sometimes people are fed up with video calls, amazingly, and it's quite nice just to have a sort of old-fashioned, no pressure conversation one-to-one on the phone. Is that something that you guys are doing as well?
So I think, yeah, absolutely. There are some families that, between colleagues, sometimes we'll just pick up the phone and call each other. Sometimes with families, for us, we plan a lot via email, and then we'll have sessions over Zoom. But actually, some families just prefer to speak over the phone. So we'll just give them a call. And we've got phone technology embedded in the laptop, so it's not off our personal phones, it's off the work phones. So again, it's thinking about that data privacy. But yes, you're right, absolutely, Nick. Sometimes just picking up the phone is the best way to connect with somebody.
Yes, and then Kat is saying a very, very valid point of kids walking by, or children, or dogs, or cats, or people using leaf blowers in the street. That's my particular pet peeve in terms of background noise. So we do definitely have all of this, and it does. I think it's good to embrace them, and this is real life. We're all dealing with this. There's by the way, if you haven't asked a question yet or made a comment, this is your challenge. Please write. There's no risk. You can even do it anonymously if you don't want us to know who you are. This is made so much richer by all your contributions. Taddy Chamnikere asks, her team is volunteers only, so that adds another layer of complexity in terms of how to structure the team, how to keep people motivated. And I know it's not really your background. We've talked a little bit about it in the previous session around Scouts, but I would love to hear any thoughts that you might have on that.
So how to motivate volunteers so this is something where they're giving their time and coming in too. So yeah, I think it comes. I also really enjoy listening to Simon Sinek when he speaks, and one of the things.
Shall I copy a link to that one?
Possibly.
Yes.
As you can see, I love reading. I love learning. It's my favorite thing to do. But the reason that I think he comes to mind is because he draws a delineation between motivation and inspiration, and he says that you can motivate people, and that's a little bit of a push. So you can push them, and inspiration is really something within that drives. So it's more of a pull from inside. And I think that particularly in a volunteering capacity, I think that inspiration piece. So when people are energized because they again maybe connect. So I'm not sure what charity you're working for, but I've heard some of the ones that are coming through, and I think there was a couple of cancer charities and tinnitus charities, and all of you doing incredible work. And I think that inspiration, so that real clear clarity on the message. I think Hendy also mentioned about how to motivate volunteers to believe in that cause. I think having that real clear value that you as a charity or an organization stand for enables people to resonate with you and come on board and really lead from behind and get you to where you all want to be going. So yeah, I think that inspiration piece, how to inspire by having this really clear vision, is what comes to mind for me. But again, if anyone has any other ideas of how they have motivated volunteers, please do share, because I'm interested too.
And we've had Jane Warren say that, and I think that's an experience that probably a lot of people can relate to. They had a WhatsApp group which wasn't that busy before, and now is much more active. It's also another way of connecting, perhaps on a more informal level, posting funny videos, etc., or not.
Yeah, Jane actually works with me at Auditory Verbal UK, and so we do have, just between us as colleagues, we've got a WhatsApp group together, and I think it's just, again, that way that you can just quickly share either something important or something that just made you laugh. And I think it's, people who are on furlough, I think that was what somebody raised, people who are on furlough are still able to feel connected. So one of my colleagues who needed to go on furlough, we had some conversations about how she felt that it was absolutely what she needed to do, but she worried about missing out and maybe not being part of the organization. And I think having that informal way of staying connected just means you can keep that relationship with your colleagues going, even if you're not perhaps able to participate in the everyday rush.
There's a really interesting question about anxiety, which actually is if I read it correctly, and please do post again if I don't. Obviously a lot of people this current situation is creating a lot of anxiety for people. But what this question is about is really about how you, as a colleague, as a manager, suddenly are becoming maybe not responsible, but suddenly you have this moral responsibility perhaps to help people with anxiety and to motivate them. And there you can see they're struggling, and it maybe requires some new skills, or can make people feel anxious just because they have to do that. I don't know if that's something that you're seeing as well.
Well, yeah, it's a very big topic. I would say, yeah, there's definitely a sense of I think it taps into that sense that we are all human. We're all human. We are all doing the absolute best we can in a global pandemic, keeping our jobs, keeping our balance at home, dealing with all of these things that are coming up for us within, the health situation, the cultural situation that's happening. It's a lot, and I think there absolutely is a sense of responsibility, I suppose, that we all feel. So I know that it can come from higher, also how to care for your team and lead them forward. But even within colleagues, it's that sense of responsibility and looking after ourselves and caring for each other, which is why I think this personal connection is so important in terms of looking after our own resilience. And as Jane was saying about the WhatsApp group, I think just having that sense of humour. I think humour isn't often the thing that comes to mind when you're in the middle of a pandemic or when you're in the middle of a crisis. It's really hard to reach that, but often it's the time that we need it the most. And being able to just see something light and to lift each other up and give each other that perspective, I think, for me anyway, and I don't know about you, Jane, or for any of the others of you that I hear, I think it's so important to have those moments and to have that balance, whilst also being able to know that you've got more formal support like the mental health training, access to people that you can speak to, and knowing where you can go for support depending on what it is that you need, whether it's a light chat with a colleague, lunch in the garden, or something more structured, I suppose.
And Steph Beeston-Clark tells us that, this pandemic has allowed people to reminded people that we are all human. You were talking, Emma, about your CEO coming in and saying, it's not been an easy week. So everybody's had those off days. It's not always easy for anybody.
Yeah.
There's a good, very difficult to answer question about how to manage differently people to live alone versus people who are struggling with childcare, young children. I mean, that's something that certainly I've experienced. And how, any suggestions? I'm assuming you don't have a silver bullet for that one, because it is so complicated, and it can create resentment when you feel like some people are not pulling their weight because maybe they have young children that they need to look after, or vice versa. It'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Can you imagine if I did have the answer to that? How great that
I know,
would be.
exactly. We could just create a company and become millionaires and put it all back into charity, of course.
We would be like Stream 2, 11 o'clock, Charity Digital breaking the internet.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's happened. We've sorted it.
Yeah, it's really tricky. It's really tough, and I think childcare and healthcare issues is why my colleague in particular needed to opt and go on furlough for that reason. And I think it just, for me, it really ties into that being human element, having the spaces to be heard. So I think it's accepting that, we are all trying our best, having trust to enable that to come through, the open communication, because sometimes these frustrations may come. And I think, for us, we still have kept our team days, except they're half days because they're virtual. And I don't think anyone can face like constantly, morning to evening of screen time without a little bit of a break. But it's space where, you could maybe just connect personally. You have a little space to identify what the challenges are. You then have another space to identify where we want to be aiming and how we might overcome them. And I think allowing people to say, this is really hard, I'm finding this really hard, is important. And I think often we think that if we don't share that, we think that if we do share that, then there's going to be judgment that comes in. And actually, I think my colleague has found, and also myself, when I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do, this is too much, I'm not sure I can cope, I speak to my colleagues and they go, okay, great, how can I help? And then you create that culture of it's okay to say we're not okay. And then you can help each other. And I feel that it's what really keeps that resentment at bay. If you're the one trying to hold it all together and do everything, and you see somebody else who is getting support, or maybe is not doing as much, and you think, oh, that, how can that be fair? I think having that culture of open communication is really the underpinning of everything else.
Yes, and some great comments here. We're obviously, Susan, not saying that people with small children aren't pulling their weight. We're saying that this very different situations in different families and different living circumstances, including people living alone, as somebody else has put, which can be very isolating, you know, will become starker in these times. And though that can build a miscommunication, that can build potentially difficulties within team. And it's really important, as Emma was saying, to open it up, to make people understand that nothing is easy, that small children are definitely not easy. Living on your own with your screen as company can be very difficult as well, and being much more open to people being human and fallible. So I think those are brilliant comments here coming in. And yes, checking in with people who live alone, I think, you know, is something that is very important as well. Yes, if somebody, as Kat mentions, can create a manual. I have 4 teenagers here. I have to feed twice a day. I can tell you, just filling the fridge has been quite an event. So okay, well, we're getting to the end of our Q&A, but before we finish, Emma, I know you've had incredible feedback and questions. You've obviously inspired our audience, which is brilliant. We will share this. You've shared your contact details, very generous of you. I'm sure you're going to be inundated with comments and questions and follow up, because this has been so inspiring. Do you have any final words? Is there anything that you want to say to close the session?
Just that I really appreciate all of you giving your time to be here and to share your thinking and your experiences. So I found it really valuable to hear your questions and to, you know, really think through them myself. And I would welcome any connection. You can find me on, like I said, LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook, and I would love to hear what you're doing and how we can connect further. So please do stay in touch.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Emma. That was absolutely brilliant.